people just are genuinely curious, and why shouldn't they be?
Right.
They absolutely should be. And on both sides of that equation, we should be confident in our own practices to have those honest conversations and show people that we don't have anything to hide. Now, granted, there are people who are going to try to get those gotcha type things and put you into things that will be taken out of context. So there is something to be said for being careful with how we share information, but it doesn't mean we have to be totally opaque to it. We definitely need to be transparent.
Yeah, no, and that's always been the policy of my podcast, is giving as transparent of a view to agriculture as possible. And, I have a full transparency policy with anything I talk about. If somebody asks me a question, I'm going to answer it with full honesty.
Right.
Hello and welcome to Talk Ag to Me, the podcast dedicated to improving ag literacy around the globe. I'm your host, Brandon Black, and today's episode, I have a very special guest for you guys. It's another ag podcaster. He runs the Ag State of Mind podcast. Jason Meadows here is going to give his own little introduction. I would like to get it for him, but quite honestly, I feel like he could do a better job himself. So, Jason.
Brendan, thank you for having me on the podcast. And I'll tell you this, there's nothing an ag, or not ag, just a podcast host in general enjoys more than being on someone else's podcast. So I appreciate the opportunity here tonight. So like you said, my name is Jason Meadows. I am from Cuba, Missouri, which is about it's about halfway between Springfield and St. Louis, Missouri, two of the three biggest cities in the state. So right in the middle of the state, only just a tad to the south. I grew up here on my mom's cow-calf operation. I lived there till I went to college. I went to pharmacy school in St. Louis, so about an hour and a half east of me. I did that for about, I was at school for 6 years. Then I came back home, started to work at a hospital here close to home. That's where I met my wife, and now we have 4 kids. We've been married for 12 years almost now, I think. But throughout my time through college, I really wanted to find a way, and not just in college, but even after I graduated college, I wanted to find a way to combine my two loves, my medical profession with my love of agriculture. I ran a cow-calf operation on my own in college. My dad helped me out while I was at school, but then I came home on the weekends, and we traded work that way. Dads are good for that sort of thing. And so it was something that really helped me through college. It helped me financially, but it also helped me to get away from the city and have a reason and a purpose to come back home to. So my love for agriculture is deep rooted. So all that being said, I wanted to find a way to combine those two worlds, my medical profession and my love for agriculture. And I really struggled with that for a really long time, trying to find a way. And then last year, July of 2019, I had that idea to start a podcast where I speak about mental health and agriculture. The reason I chose mental health and agriculture is because I myself had dealt with a lot of mental health issues, really had a hard time coping with a lot of anxiety. And believe it or not, a lot of it stemmed from agriculture, stemmed from trying to probably fit too much in with a town job, and just a lot of, and then a family, all the things that go along with it, and just having a really hard time managing everything. But then I got better. I got myself better, and I wanted to reach out and share what I've learned and then hopefully learn more and just bring that perspective. It's kind of a three-pronged effort, I've always said, in that I am a medical professional, I am an ag producer, and I have struggled myself with mental health. So I feel like it's a very unique perspective to talk about this, and a conversation that really needs to be had, especially by someone like me who's living the stresses, that is a man. Men do not want to talk about this kind of stuff at all. And try to maybe be a little bit of first one out of the gate, not the first one out of the gate, there's other people talking about this, but be one of those people who is willing to put themselves out there, because I can handle it. I can handle the pressure that is coming from it, and I feel like I feel obligated, and I feel like I have a gift and a calling to do this sort of work.
Wow. Well, yeah, that's definitely it's a very noble goal to, to do what you're doing. And it's definitely awesome that you're out there doing, what you do. I think it's a really important topic that doesn't get talked about enough, especially in the ag spheres, is just, especially in today's, society, we kind of have started to put more of an emphasis on the importance of mental health and maintaining, mental health and all that sort of thing. But as we've talked about on my podcast before, agriculture is kind of outside of that loop of mainstream conversations, and so the mental health of those involved in agriculture kind of gets left out in that bunch. And so I was really excited to hear about your podcast in the first place and be able to bring you on here and talk about some of that stuff, because it's something that in all the conversations I've had with lots of people about different aspects of the industry, the thing that tends to be missing from that conversation is the humanization of the farmer. People tend to forget that, farmers are people too. They go through the same struggles. They go through the same issues that everyone else deals with, and some even more severely than others, because of the massive amount of stress associated with the job that comes with producing food. So it's really, really, like I said, awesome to hear that you're doing what you're doing, that you're passionate about it, that you have, like you mentioned, those three different perspectives all tied into one person, able to kind of give that proper discussion about the topic that's, so important. So I think that's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's a really cool thing. And podcasts are honestly really fun because you get to talk to someone you wouldn't have had the opportunity to talk to at all. I mean, what are the chances you and I would have met in real life? Probably pretty slim, right? Yeah. But here's the podcast world, and it's made it super easy for us to get together. Yeah. And I'm very thankful for that. And that's probably the thing about podcasting that has been the biggest benefit to me, is the connections that I've been able to make through it. And just finding, I've got some people that I genuinely call them friends. We've never met in person, but they're still friends. And it's amazing how technology and how things have moved forward to be able to connect us with people from all around, not just the country, but the world.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And it's like you said, when we first started this, there's nothing more enjoyable to a podcaster than being on someone else's podcast.
Right. Yeah.
There's something fun about, being like, oh yeah, I'm special enough to get invited to things. Yeah. I don't know why, but no, I couldn't agree more. I've made some really, really close friends through the podcasting community. It was a really, really important step of my life. I mean, if I hadn't started my podcast, I don't know where I'd be. I'd probably still be, going to college, studying to be an ag teacher, but I mean, I wouldn't be having nearly as much fun as I have been over the past 3 years.
Sure. And who knows what it's going to do for you, I mean, who knows what it's going to turn into for you. And that's the cool thing about it, is like this just opens up so many more new doors than it would have without it.
Oh yeah. And it's done, it's already done so much for me in terms of just, not only opening doors, but just providing me with experience and knowledge and things I wouldn't have known about before. And
absolutely,
it's even changed my perspective on some things,
me too, 100%.
Yeah. Growing up and doing FFA and doing, speaking teams and all that kind of stuff, I was always kind of led to believe that consumers don't like farmers, that they are, actively against what's going on in agriculture. And I've had those conversations and learned that that's not really the case. There are some who are completely against what's going on. Most of them just don't know what's going on, but they're curious to learn about it if you tell them. And so, having those kind of conversations, meeting people who actually have an interest and are curious and just didn't know where to look, that was kind of eye-opening to me, that there's still hope out there for people to learn and care about farmers.
So let's bring that into like a mental health perspective, because you mentioned that in the humanization of farmers, humanization of folks involved in agriculture, and you feel like that is something that is missing. And whenever you talk about the consumer, we so much, and I'm talking about this from the farmer's perspective, we almost see them as a faceless entity, or have in the past. And that's changing. And I think it's changing for the better, because we are seeing that people are actually interested in our side of the food chain and our side of food chain supply. And if we do it right, I think that's good for the mental health of the farmers, to know that people are actually, like, instead of guessing about it, knowing exactly what they want, exactly what someone in LA wants to know about. I mean, that's maybe a bad example, but I mean, because that's not the norm across America. But someone in an urban area wants to know about how the meat was raised from the time it was born to the time it went to the processor. I mean, it's a really fascinating thing for me as an ag producer, that sort of conversation, that sort of talk is happening, because people have been so far removed. I think it's a good thing that they are trying to ask these questions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've been caught off guard by some of the questions I've been asked. I mean, they're like, typically, for someone who hasn't had any experience talking to anyone but ag people, you go into a conversation with somebody like somebody from an urban city, or somebody from like the LA area, and you expect them to not know anything about agriculture, which is, now I can admit that that's kind of a closed-minded view of things. But you go in and talk to them, and they have like legitimate questions that are very like intricate, and questions that I haven't even thought of before, and things that I have had to actually gone and research and come back to them about, just because I wasn't fully aware of what the situation was on certain things, and their concerns aren't founded in fear. They're often founded in curiosity, or they're founded in just general lack of understanding, and they want to know. And that's often like the thing is that we always assume that they're scared of new technology, or they're scared of pesticides, or they're scared of antibiotics, when in reality they just want to know what's happening, and we're not telling them.
Sure. Yeah, right. No, you're 100% right with that. And people just are genuinely curious, and why shouldn't they be?
Right.
They absolutely should be. And on both sides of that equation, we should be confident in our own practices to have those honest conversations and show people that we don't have anything to hide. Now, granted, there are people who are going to try to get those gotcha type things and put you into things that will be taken out of context. So there is something to be said for being careful with how we share information, but it doesn't mean we have to be totally opaque to it. We definitely need to be transparent.
Yeah, no, and that's always been the policy of my podcast, is giving as transparent of a view to agriculture as possible. And I have a full transparency policy with anything I talk about. If somebody asks me a question, I'm going to answer it with full honesty.
Right.
I always respect the like, if I'm talking about somebody else, or if I'm talking in reference to somebody else, I'm obviously gonna allow them to keep their any kind of discrepancy that they want to keep hidden. But as far as anything that I have going on with my project, I don't hide things for the sake of, because I've always said, the more transparent you are, the less problems you're going to have, essentially. Because if people know you have nothing to hide, they have nothing on you anymore. And
sure.
So,
yeah.
Like I've talked about, in the past, there are some people out there who, all they want to do is cause chaos, and all they want to do is, fight and cause trouble. And they're not looking to learn. They're looking to pick a fight. You're not going to be able to do much with those people. Some, the very rare instances can have their mind changed. I haven't seen a whole lot of those. Most of the time, though, that's not the general audience. Most consumers are pretty open-minded to stuff like that, and they're not looking to bash down the farmer. They're just looking to have a fun conversation and learn something new. And that's been kind of my, that's been the fun part of my experience, is getting to have those conversations where people actually are looking to learn something new. So I think that's a good transition into the point of, what you've experienced on your podcast with some of the people that you've talked to. So first of all, before we get into that, what are some of because I know you do have guests on your podcast. What are the guests like? Are they from agricultural backgrounds? Are they?
So I'd say I haven't done the total breakdown, but I'd say 80% or yeah, 80% of the folks I have talked to are directly involved in agriculture in some form or another. There are actually some health professionals that I've talked to. There's some in fact, I talked to a life coach of my wife. That she's the one that she works with, and she has a podcast of her own, and we talked about her approach. But so the goal or my target person that I want to reach are people like me. I want to reach men who are 25 to 45, have a young family, are involved in agriculture either full-time or part-time. Like I don't think you're ever really involved in agriculture part-time. It may not be your full-time job per se, but I mean, there's no such thing as someone being involved in it part-time. But someone like me, I want to reach someone like me. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that someone like me is the only person I listen, because overwhelming majority of the people who listen to me are women. But that's okay, because they reach the men. That the women reach the men and tell the men about what they have heard on my podcast, and who the people and you'll find out a lot of the guests are women, because a lot of women are the ones who want to talk about this stuff,
right?
And but that's okay. Again, it goes back to as long as the message gets relayed to the people like me, which I think it is, those are the people that I'm trying to reach, and I think I'm doing a good job of that.
Awesome. Yeah. And then that's always been kind of the goal, right? Is if you can reach one person who has a connection to the person you're trying to reach, then you've already gotten there, basically. It's
100%. Yeah.
So yeah, like even if it's not necessarily those men that are listening, they're still getting the message.
They're still getting the info, and that's what matters.
Right. No, exactly. That's awesome. So have you, I mean, before we move on more to the guest stuff, have you had a lot of interaction from your audience? Have people like reached out to you?
Yeah. Yes. And that's like, man, that's the kind of stuff that keeps you going. Man, when people tell you like how much they enjoy your podcast or enjoy a certain, I love it when people like reach out and like get really specific and talk to me about like a little like tidbit of information they got. And even like, I love it when it's something that like didn't even hit for me. Like, I love it when they say, it's like, oh, this was my favorite part. And I'm like, oh, really? That awesome. Because I mean, it means I'm reaching people in a number of different ways. And, that's really cool. I love that. I love when people reach out and tell me what they learned or what they liked about the podcast. And even like, I have some good friends who'll even tell me like, oh man, the audio wasn't great in that, or like, you sounded really quiet. So, I mean, even the constructive criticism, man, like that's awesome too, because it makes me get better.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. Anytime I have somebody comment on my podcast, whether it's something productive or something I can do better, or if it's just like, hey, you're doing a good thing, just keep going. It's just it's like a warm feeling that just shows like, ooh, man, somebody actually likes me. Cool. That's awesome. So I think that the conversation of ag mental health itself is one that hasn't really reached my conversations much, and it hasn't really reached the minds of a lot of the people who aren't actively involved in the industry, but it is a massive issue. So I don't know if you necessarily have any numbers or anything like that in terms of what level of agriculturally involved people are affected by mental health in a severe way or anything like that. Or
I mean, I don't, but I will say this: 100% of people need to pay attention to it.
Agreed.
Every single person, agriculture or not, every person needs to pay attention to their mental health, because mental health isn't something that is like you either have it or you don't, or we all have it. It's not good or bad. It's just it's a neutral thing. It's something that we have and that we can take control of if we let it, but it's also something that can take control of us if we don't pay attention. So always monitoring, always knowing where we are, what's causing us stress, what's causing us stress relief, always being comfortable enough and self-aware enough to have those conversations with not only with ourselves, but with the people who are close to us, and having those people who we can have those safe and meaningful conversations with that's really key. That's
Mhm.
really the thing. And as far as numbers, I mean, everybody experiences stress in some form or another. So that is affecting their mental health. So, I mean, everybody needs to pay attention to it.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, just speaking personally, since I moved to Fresno and got involved in my first year of 4-year college, because I transferred from a community college to a 4-year college. So like moving on top of that stress, on top of podcast stuff, and on top of that, like I know for sure that I was experiencing things that I hadn't experienced before, and if it wasn't for my girlfriend, who was fairly well experienced in anxiety and depression and that kind of stuff, if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have known what was going on. So there's always a level of uncertainty associated with it, but if you have someone to talk to about it, if you have someone to work through with it, it definitely makes it a lot easier to make it through.
Yeah, and you bring up an interesting point in talking about the transition from high school to college, or from a new college to another. I mean, that was one of the most stressful times of my life. And I would have given anything to know that it was okay to be as stressed as I was, and known that it was normal, because man, that was a really big burden for me, and something that like, and God bless my parents. I mean, they do the best they can, but they weren't equipped with the skills like so many parents of that generation are. They just like, oh man, you just got to suck it up. You just got to do your best. And like, that attitude's good, but it's not always the most helpful.
Right.
And so I think being aware of that, and being aware that even college students, even people who are in the perceived best days of their life, or whatever they say, that they're getting stress, and that it's hard on them, for people to understand that, and people like yourself to know that it's important to pay attention to it, even at that stage of the game. It's going to save you a lot of stress and heartache later on when you're my age.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, having a better understanding of how to handle that kind of stuff, again, thanks to my girlfriend being able to help me through that kind of, situation, was definitely, if I hadn't have figured out how to properly address that, I would probably still be having a hard time with my with my productivity, with my with my success with the podcast, with my grades and all that kind of stuff, because it really did bring me down for a solid week before I figured out what to do about it. And you never truly do anything about it. It's just managing it until it's not going to drag you to the ground anymore.
Sure.
But yeah, so that being said, how obviously you seem to know quite a bit about mental health and the different struggles the different types of people have gone through. What have you learned since starting the podcast about mental health in terms of both agriculture and just generally?
So I think the biggest thing I've learned, and it's already what I said, is like, mental health is something everyone should pay attention to. And I didn't know that when I started the podcast. I totally expected to just talk about people with mental illness, mental disorder, people with depression, anxiety, and I thought it was going to be a very niche kind of conversation. But the more, like, very early on, I learned that this is not something that's niche. This is something that everyone needs to talk about. And I remember people telling me, "Oh, that's kind of narrow, isn't it? That's kind of narrow thing." I was like, "Yeah, it is, but I think I'm going to reach the people." But no, it's not. It's not a narrow conversation. It's a huge conversation. It's something we all need to be talking about. And I mean, I sure can't totally cover the I don't think I realized how important it really was, and how big of an issue it really needed to be to talk about it. And the fact that even though that we all are different, we all experience stress differently, certain things affect us differently as an industry, ag in general. I don't know the first thing about row crop farming. I never have, I probably never will. I mean, I've learned a lot just by talking, making friends and talking to people, but I'll never experience or know what it's like to have a hailstorm come and destroy a crop for me. I mean, that's something I'm never going to have to probably deal with. But at the same time, I can totally relate what that would look like in my, say we had a snowstorm in the middle of calving season and lost half my calf crop, or whatever it might be. I mean, I can understand how that would affect me. and I can apply that to my own and have a lot of empathy for someone who is going through that situation. And I think that's what makes agriculture so unique is we, even though we aren't necessarily doing the same things, we understand one another. We all understand one another, and it can be a really great and uplifting community.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I've had that similar experience. I mean, obviously I haven't been involved in production agriculture enough to know, what that level of, pain and stress would feel like, because my closest interaction has either been working on farms or just raising cattle for show and not really doing a whole lot of, actual commercial work with my own herd or anything like that. But I mean, kind of the closest thing I can compare it to is, I don't know if I'm sure you've heard, but back in 2009, in California, we had a monstrous amount of dairymen taking their own lives because of the, just the economy, collapsing and just how terrible the milk price was. And just like, I lost, my dad lost a lot of really good friends. I lost a lot of really good family friends. We watched half of our town get torn apart it was just god awful. I mean, like I was only 9 years old, so obviously I didn't really know what was happening at the time, but looking back on it now, seeing how detrimental just, a flux in economic status can be to, a single person's livelihood or an entire industry's livelihood is something that, it kind of puts in perspective just how serious this, this topic is, and also how serious the conversation around how we can keep those types of things from happening is. So I don't know if I'm sure that, you've heard about that sort of thing happening, or I know that it happens fairly frequently in the ag industry.
Oh my gosh. There's something about dairy. The dairy is, and I think a lot of it has to lead, I don't want to go down too much of a rabbit hole here, but there's just something about dairy. And I think it's how the lifestyle is. I mean, it's 24/7. It's no days off. It's no vacation. It's milking the cows twice a day, even on Christmas. I mean, that's a lifestyle that is so hard. And when it gets disrupted, it's really hard for the people to deal with. And I've found that, like, and I'll say this, the industry I have learned the most about through this process is the dairy industry. I've talked to probably more dairy producers than I've talked to any other certain type of farmer. And it's incredible that I don't think I really got it until, I still don't totally get it because I don't live it. But their lives are incredibly, I mean, it's incredibly stressful. And, then to think about what happened this last spring with the milk dumping and that sort of thing. And now they've got the Dean Foods thing. I don't know if you've heard about that. I mean, I'm sure you probably have a little bit, but but it's, they're wanting some of their payments back for their farmers, and like, man, like give these folks a break.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's a big thing, whenever which, like I said, I don't discuss it very often, but whenever I do bring up, mental health and agriculture in episodes, people tend to not, they kind of like bat their eyes and like, what do you mean? I'm like, oh, you don't know. Like dairymen, especially, I know it happens in other industries, but dairymen, especially from what I've seen, have a significantly high rate of taking their own lives and having severe mental health issues due to just economic flux alone. That has nothing to do with regulations or changes in markets. That's just from economic perspective. That's there's other things that cause those stressful factors too. But like I almost equate like the dairy industry or like a dairy operation to like a body that doesn't have a great immune system. It works really well until you throw something foreign in there, and then it just destroys the entire thing.
Yeah, it is, and that's right, man. And it's it's hard. And God bless the people that do it. There's some great folks in the dairy industry, and I'm so thankful for them. And but man, it can get really tough for them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, like I said, my hometown is all dairy, so it's we have seen it firsthand. We've known quite a few family friends who have gone through that struggle. It's not fun to watch from the sideline. I can only imagine how they feel, being in the middle of it. But
right.
So transitioning away from the morbid topic. As an agriculturalist, and as someone who deals with cattle, cattle are kind of my favorite aspect of agriculture. Do you see that as because I actually got asked this question the other day. Somebody asked me once, because we were talking about mental health and ag, because I was talking to them about how I was going to do this episode, and they were like, well, typically people think of agriculture as like their retirement job. Like you get to, just chill with your pasture, and, you get to check on your cows. It's very relaxing and all that kind of stuff. Like, don't farmers, find comfort in being able to just have their own land and just chill? And I basically, I mean, and you can answer this better than I can, but I basically said, like, yeah, there are definitely, very relaxing aspects of the job, and it's a very fun job. It just is associated with a lot of high stress, because it's basically, it's high risk, high reward kind of operation here. So, I mean, I don't know if that's your experience. I'm sure that you.
So if you, and I talked earlier, like I had a lot of things, the up and down of the cattle market in 2014 that I kind of got stuck in a little bit on the bad. I had to kind of eat some stuff on that, and that was really tough for me, and still is tough for me to deal with. But I love it. I wouldn't be doing it. It's not worth doing if you don't enjoy the hell out of it.
Right.
I mean, because I do. And what's the really cool thing about it to me, before we were out here, we weaned some calves a couple weeks ago, and I had a late meeting at work, so I didn't get home. I got home right before dark, and I text my son. My son's 15, and I said, we need to sort the steers from the heifers, because we hadn't done that yet. We just had them all running together. And I said, and then I forgot about that, man. Like, I will just do it tomorrow. Well, I got home, they've already got them in the lot, started sorting them. And so, like, that's the cool thing to me about it, is getting to go down there with, it was two of my sons. One is 15, the other 10, and getting to work with them. And we talk about the herd and talk about which calves we like. We're down there, we're picking out their 4-H calves for the fair and that sort of thing. And, the bonding and, the kind of legacy type planning that goes along with it. I mean, it's so cool. And being able to have that with your kids and with the family, and it was like that for me and my dad. I mean, that was the thing. When we couldn't agree on anything else, we agreed over how much we loved cattle. And that's amazing. That's an amazing thing to have. And so, I mean, and it's stressful. It can get incredibly stressful. The markets are totally out of our control. The weather is totally out of our control. Trade's totally out of our control. Consumer opinions we can control them a little bit, but there are a lot of other outside factors in that. But so it's very stressful, or it can be very stressful, but it doesn't mean we can't enjoy it and do the things that's fun about it. And so, even though I don't necessarily agree with someone who might say, well, that's like a retirement old man thing, there is a certain amount of bliss that comes with just riding around and checking cows, especially when the weather's nice.
Yeah,
and I can definitely, when the weather's starting to warm up in the spring, and cows are starting to get on green grass. You drive around, there's new calves on the ground. You look at them. I mean, shoot, that's a lot of therapy for me. 100%.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, like I said, I did raise beef cattle throughout high school. My dad raised beef cattle when he was in high school. So, like, we would always bond over my calves and working with him. We would wash them together and talk about, oh yeah, that's a nice steer. Like, we go to jackpot shows and talk about, oh yeah, look at that steer, look at that steer. So, like, that was kind of my, whenever I was stressed out, I would go out to my steer, and that was like my happy place, was getting to hang out with my steer and, feed him and just kind of sit there and pet on him and all that kind of stuff. So, like, I can definitely relate to that aspect of it. Do you know, because I don't know what it is exactly, but there's something about, and I'm not sure if this is for everyone or not, but there's something about being around animals, particularly baby animals as well. Like calves or piglets or whatever the kids or, whatever the animal is. But, like, there's something about being around animals that's like almost like, like you said, therapeutic or relaxing or just comforting. Do you know why that is?
So I can't speak exactly to it on like the animals like cattle, cattle, goats, that sort of thing, but I can't talk about it on horses, because I've had a couple of people on the podcast who did therapy with horses, like equine therapy, which is something that's super interesting to me because we grew up showing horses too.
Okay.
And horses are documented to be therapeutic in that they can match their heart rate to yours.
Oh, really?
And it's an incredibly almost something that I didn't believe, but I've had two different people came on the podcast, and we talked about it. And because my dad will say this, and what you said about you're going and taking care and washing your steers remind me of something my dad used to tell me, in that he would have he couldn't sleep or something, and he would wake up in the middle of the night, and he had the barn was right next to the house, and he would just go out and get a yearling colt out of the stall and tie him up and brush him, and whatever was on his mind, reason he couldn't sleep, and he'd go out there, he'd take care of that horse for 15 minutes, put it back in the stall, come back and go back to sleep like a baby. And so I've always known that there is a therapeutic ability of horses, but I didn't have it confirmed until it was Chris Miner and Beth Killow, episodes 46 and 2 or 3. I can't remember exactly when Chris's was, but around there, they were both very close to one another. And that was very encouraging and justifying it to me to know that. And I think cows are the same way, or any kind of prey animal. Prey animals have that ability, I think, to kind of match, and they're very intuitive, very instinct, because they know when they need to leave and when they don't. So they pay a lot of attention to how we interact with them, and we can learn a lot from just watching them move and watching them eat. And I'd say whatever, any kind of, there is definitely a therapeutic effect to spending time with animals.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so my sister trains horses for a living. That's her job. Okay. So she knows all about the horse therapy. She actually she volunteered at, I don't know if you're familiar with Happy Trails, but they do horse therapy for kids with special needs. And she worked over there for a long time. So she's, I learned a lot of what I know about animal behavior through her. The thing is, though, what's weird is she obviously knows, a significant amount about animals and how to, and specifically horses and how to train them. She knows how their brains work. She knows how they'll interact to certain things. She can read their body language. She's been studying them for a pretty good amount of time. Almost everything that she knows about horses, I've been able to translate into cattle. And I find that a lot of the things tend to transfer over. I mean, horses are a bit more complex than cattle by far. But I mean, horses tend to be a little bit smarter than cattle too.
Of course,
obviously. Yeah. But there's something about cattle that I've noticed that have a very similar therapeutic effect to horses. I'm not sure exactly why. Maybe it's like you said, prey animals tend to have that herd mentality of you're part of my family now. And, that might, because they're obviously gonna be less competitive than predator animals. So I'm not sure if it's that, but I mean, I studied a lot of Temple Grandin, and, she has a lot of stuff on that too, as well, as far as, how to get animals to trust you. And as soon as they trust you, there seems to be some weird, unspoken, bond almost between, you and that animal, to a point where you almost feel safer around them. You're trying to make them feel safer around you, and you actually end up feeling safer around them than you realize. So it's,
did you have Temple on the podcast?
I did.
Did I remember? Yeah, so did I.
Oh,
incredible.
Really?
Yeah.
Awesome. Oh, she's amazing. I've been studying her for years.
I know. So have I.
Yeah.
Incredible human being.
Yeah. So she's awesome. I've been kind of employing some of her lessons into some of the things I've been talking about on the podcast as far as animal behavior and stuff goes. So,
she's just, I mean, she's I don't know, there's not a word for her. There's not a word to describe her, because she's just so extraordinary. And, I find myself thinking about her anytime I step in a semi-closed space with a cow. I think of her. And I think of, how would she approach this? And, why is that cow balking at that? It gives you such a bigger picture of what we're doing other than just standing there screaming at a bunch of cows.
Right.
And there's a lot that can be, I wish, and it is, she's getting more and more recognized and well known, but I mean, everyone who owns a cow should.
Oh, you there?
Yeah, I'm there. There was a little,
Okay.
that was weird. I don't know what that was.
Yeah, you cut out for a second. It's all good. But yeah, no, I completely agree. She's, unbelievable. And anyone who's working with, I mean, not just cattle, but animals in general need to be, aware of her stuff. I mean, what I learned about her in terms of like flight zones and, testing, all that kind of stuff. I started reading about her stuff my freshman year of high school. And by my sophomore year, I had learned enough about how to handle cattle that I was teaching all of the rest of the kids in my grade and younger, and even some older than me, about showmanship and all that kind of stuff, because of they didn't understand that relationship with animals. So they'd walk in, terrified, and they'd walk in the cows, or in the steer's blind spot, and they wonder why their steer's running away from them. And so I had to like teach them. I taught them all about flight zones. I taught them all about, how to introduce yourself to an animal and make sure it knows that you're not a threat. I taught them all this stuff. And it wasn't until I taught them that I really understood it, because how they always say, like,
Sure.
You don't understand something until you can teach it to someone else. So I really, after studying her stuff, really tried it, and I tested some stuff out. And like, have you ever seen the movie How to Train Your Dragon?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I felt like that, but with cows.
Okay.
So yeah. I was testing out different stuff. I was like, okay, that worked. Okay, that got him to kick me, so that's not going to be a good idea. So I was just like, trying out different stuff, and I was playing with stuff that I read from her books and stuff like that. And I kind of developed my own, Grandin-based style of approaching cattle. And I was comparing it with my sister's notes on how to handle horses, and I like learned a few new things about how cattle, interact with people and with other animals. And so it was really interesting, and it definitely helped me understand more about how, their behavior works, and a little bit more about why we're so, prone to bonding with them so quickly.
Yeah, no, she's incredible. And you should, have you ever watched the movie? You ever watched her HBO movie?
So I watched it my freshman year of high school, but it's been so long, I don't even remember what it was about now.
It was just, she said that they did an excellent job.
Oh, really?
With her and how she thought in pictures. It's worth watching for sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm always surprised, because I talk about her all the time on the podcast. I'm explaining, like, when people ask about slaughterhouses, I explain how she designed like the, the winding pattern. And I explain how, because they for some reason, they don't seem to understand how she was able to, think like an animal was, and she was able to see all the things that the animal would see. So like, half the, I guess I'm not surprised, but half the consumers I had talked to had never even heard of her. So I've been really trying to introduce her to the public, like, guys, you got to get behind this. This is so cool. And
100%.
Some of them pick it up. Some of them are just like, that's okay.
Yeah. Right.
So yeah, no, that was kind of, I mean, I was just curious if you had any knowledge on why it is the animals are kind of our go-to therapy, therapy buddies.
Just from what I said, I mean, I don't know anything about anything as far as that, other than it's real.
Yeah, no, that's definitely, I mean, that's been apparent as far as I can see. That's why we have therapy dogs and horses, right. And we even have therapy llamas. I didn't even know about that until recently.
Yeah, it's funny all the stuff you can get into with that.
Right. So, but yeah, no, that's cool stuff. So you mentioned that you've had some people on your podcast that are less agriculturally based and more just, other medical professionals. What have their thoughts been on the whole ag mental health thing?
So I think, and for the most part, I'm trying to think here as you ask that question. Even the people who aren't involved in agriculture are familiar with rural life. And, so I think, to me, that's the big end game here is talking about ag for sure, but even expanding out just rural life. And because I think that's something that people in rural America are feeling forgotten a lot. And I mean, it's hard unless they have a voice. And, so I think, and I don't want to deviate from your original question too much here, but talking about rural America and the problems that they have are real, and they aren't understood by people who haven't lived them. Do my part to end the stigma of mental health in ag, but also to get a grip on all the health and both mental and physical issues affecting rural America. And that's the overall, like, I think I found that mission in the middle of what I was originally trying to do, and I think that's my big picture mission. But to go back to your original question, what are the professional type people saying? And they understand. They totally understand, because you can explain to them what the issues we're going through are in agriculture, and they understand it, because there's so much that is outside of our control. And they also understand that it takes somebody who understands the lifestyle, understands the life, to kind of provide help. And that's where a lot of this kind of mental health first aid is coming in. I don't know if you've heard of that or not, but it's a lot of training that's going on with people who are involved with these farmers day to day, like your vets, like your seed salesmen, like your nutritionists, that sort of people. And trying to get them to recognize the initial symptoms, initial signs of people who are struggling mentally, and then being able to get them to the proper professional. So I think that's the big thing that the professionals are showing us, is that it's going to take an all hands on deck approach to this.
Wow. Well, I mean, it's definitely, it's good to hear that they're not only, sympathetic to the situation, but they also have some potential solutions and some improvements.
Yes. And I want to talk to more actual professionals. That's a goal of mine, is to get more actual mental health professionals on, because first of all, to kind of show them that to bring them to bring them to ag folks, and maybe bridge that gap as someone who's kind of a mediator there, and talk to them about the stresses in agriculture and let them expound upon it even further. That's really important to me.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. I think that, so I don't know if I mentioned this, but I'm studying to become an ag teacher. So
yeah,
I am trying to make it a goal of mine, by the time I become a teacher, to learn more about mental health. That way I could see it present in my students. I can help them out as well.
And that's another goal of mine, is to I want the FFA kids and the 4-H kids to have this as part of their curriculum. I want to get out in front of those kids and talk to them and get this message to them, because I want them to understand that it's okay to talk about this stuff before someone tells them that it's not okay.
Right.
Because I think that's the problem, right? Is we've gotten conditioned to think that this stuff is not okay to talk about,
right,
when in fact it's crucial to talk about it, or else it's going to be a wreck. And another thing that I didn't realize when I started, that pretty early on, that I want to get into those 14 to 18 year olds in that impressionable age, like you are, like when you're doing as an ag teacher. I mean, that's where I want to be too.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. I think it's, like you mentioned, it's not just important, but it's almost vital that they, they begin to learn this,
Yeah, because it's so much easier to learn it when you're 14, 18 than when you're 35.
Right. Yeah, no kidding. I'm glad that I learned it as early as I did, or else I might have been.
Oh yeah, no, it's great. Yeah.
So I think that the last question that I have for you is that, you know, I like I mentioned, I've been trying to learn more about this kind of stuff. So I've looked into some other mental health podcasts, and I've learned that they're kind of everywhere. I mean, there's a lot of mental health podcasts out there, and that, you know, shows how much of a pressing issue it is that some people want not only talk about it, but they're all getting a ton of listeners too, which means that people want to listen to it as well.
Hmm.
So what do you think, like, obviously, you know, some of them are going to be non-ag people connecting to like non-ag based mental health stuff. Like, you're reaching out to the ag crowd. Do you think that there's room for like mental health to be the connector between ag and the consumer? Like, do you think that by showing like, yeah, you know, farmers go through the same stuff that you go through, you guys aren't as different as you think? Do you think that could be something worth, you know,
Certainly,
bringing?
because it makes them, again, it goes back to the original thing you said in humanizing the farmer and helping them understand that, you know, we have issues just the same as someone who's not involved in the industry does. You
Mhm.
know, we still have marriage stress. We still have, you know, the stress of how our kids are doing in school, and um, how, you know, even simple things like school ball games and you know, community events. And you know, they're we all, and it's a great thing about, I mean, not just as Americans, but as, you know, a global society, we can all find some common ground somewhere. We
Mhm.
all have something in common, and being able to bridge it, and maybe mental health is that. I've never thought of it that way, in bridging that gap. uh, Understanding that, you know, this is something we all go through. We experience it over different things, but we still experience it. You know, maybe that is a good thing that comes out of this, and we talk about it more with our consumers, and bridge that gap. I hope so. I hope that's a really interesting thing, and I've never really thought of it that way.
Yeah, I mean, as we kind of discussed it, I started to, you know, it started to appear to me more because my entire goal here is to be what I consider somewhat of a translator between producer to consumer. You know, try to
Sure.
take the agricultural technical language and put it in layman terms that consumers are not only going to understand, but they're going to be interested in learning about too. And so I think that a big part of that, like I mentioned at the beginning of this, is, you know, helping the consumer understand that the farmer is not only a person, but they're very similar to how the consumer lives their life as
Hmm.
well. Just because they run different jobs, and one farmer, his job is his life, and the consumer, his job may not be his life, doesn't mean that they're different people. So
Right. Oh, sure.
as I was thinking about it, I was like, huh, I mean, they do go through the same issues, just in different contexts. That might not be, I mean, it's kind of the whole, you know, the enemy of my enemy is my friend mentality.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So that being said, I mean, like I said, that was kind of the last question I had. But from your perspective, looking at, you know, what I'm doing with my podcast, I'm communicating with consumers. Is there anything that you recommend that I do, like, you know, more mental health awareness stuff for farmers, having more of the conversation of, you know, farmers are people too? Like, is there anything that you would recommend for my message?
No, I think you're onto something there, in, you know, doing your best to humanize the farmer and bringing them out and showing that they are real people too, and they aren't like this, um like, exception to society.
Hmm.
That's a big thing, you know, because I think even as farmers we feel like that sometimes, and we feel almost like that we have this image to uphold.
Hmm.
And to know that that's not necessary, it's not necessarily to have a image of what a farmer is. And, you know, in fact, I think that's more harmful, because it means that we have to try to live up to something. And instead we can just be okay with, you know, whatever makes us individuals, and whatever makes, so yeah, so trying to bring out the individualism of each person that you talk to, both on the consumer and the producer side, I think that's really key. And you know, because I think what, being able to relate to someone, making everyone relatable, that's I think the best way to be a conduit.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, and that's been kind of the, you know, that's what I've been working towards this whole time. I'm hoping that I can actually kind of get there, being a, you know, a good, you know, a good transitionary piece between that, you know, the producers and the consumers, and having that conversation be
Sure.
not only productive but actually lead to some healthier relationships between the two. So
Right.
But I think that's all. I think that's all I have for you. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to comment on or anything. If you had any questions or anything.
No, man, Brennan, I appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk again. Like we talked about, love coming on other people's podcasts because it's refreshing to be on this side of the mic sometimes. And, I just encourage everybody to, first of all, obviously check out my podcast, Ag State of Mind. Find it across all podcast mediums. Website is agstateofmind.com. And then just don't be afraid to have the mental health conversation with someone who's close to you, because chances are if you're not going to have it with them, they may not have it at all. And I mean, it's way better to have that hard conversation now than wish you had it later.
Mm-hmm. Yep. No, I couldn't agree more. And I'm glad that you plugged all your stuff. I was actually going to ask you to do that again. So perfect. I'll link all that down in the description. But yeah, no, I think that was, good conversation, a good stopping point, good message to end on. So that's all I've got. Thanks again, Jason, for coming on the podcast.
Man.
It was
of course
sure a pleasure. Thanks again to all the listeners for tuning in and for all the support you guys give and all that great stuff. I hope to see you next week. And don't forget, if you ate today, thank a farmer.